So I thought this would be the easiest way to discuss interoception. So, and how it's helpful with anxiety and other emotional discomfort. So interoception is the ability to sense what's going on in your body, right? So when you're tensing your muscles, when your heart rate speeds up, um, when you're hungry, right? When you have to go to the bathroom, that's all interoception, right? And that goes hand in hand with neuroception. And neuroception is our ability to detect a threat, or at least a perceived threat in our environment. And so when our nervous system detects a threat in our environment, it launches into fight or flight, which many of us are familiar with. And that's your anxiety response. That is a fight or flight response. When we go into fight or flight, we have a very physical response to it because our body begins to prepare to either fight the threat or to flee. So what happens is muscles tense up to get ready to face that threat or to run away, right? Hips, shoulders, face tenses, core tenses to stabilize. Our pupils will dilate to let more light in so that we can see better. Heart rate increases, breath rate increases. A whole host of physiological responses happens when we launch into fight or flight, which are perfectly normal responses to a threat. The problem is that we're no longer being chased by bears in most cases. Now we're perceiving the threat as socializing if we have social anxiety, or a nasty email from our boss if we work in a toxic work environment, or that guy that just cut us off in traffic, right? Which arguably could be a threat. But we are encountering perceived threats where the response is not to fight or flee, but we're still having that physical response, right? And what happens among people who have trauma or who are neurodivergent, and everybody has trauma in this day and age, but especially people who are neurodivergent, because the that particular wiring of the brain, the fact we're not supported in society, means that we just inherently have trauma. And there's also similarities between the neurodivergent sensory processing and hypervigilance in traumatized individuals. So with that said, when you live in this sort of hypersensory, hypervigilant state, you are constantly in a state of fight or flight to some degree, right? That's kind of our baseline. And because we're always in that state, we tend to desensitize or dissociate from those physical sensations. And in doing so, we walk around in fight or flight with those physical responses on a regular basis. We walk around with a baseline level of anxiety. And when we actually encounter a threat or a perceived threat, it's very difficult for us to recognize that and be able to calm it down. So, a real world example is a panic attack, right? So, if you're having a panic attack, usually there's a very physical indication that you're having a panic attack, right? But if you are desensitized or dissociated from those sensations, you're not going to feel the early warning signs of a panic attack. You're going to feel it when it's full blown, and it's really hard to regulate. It's really hard to pull back from, right? Whereas if you have better interoception, you're able to pick up on early signs and use regulation skills to hopefully avoid going into a full blown panic attack. So that's a little bit about interoception and how regulation skills work. Now, how do I teach those regulation skills? I do that through mindfulness, meaning that I draw my client's attention into their internal sensations. Notice the space between your shoulder blades. What's going on there? What happens when you think about that space? What about your jaw? Are you clenching it? Right? Notice your breath. Notice where you feel your body, or get curious about where you feel your body expanding and contracting. Right. So that's one way. We do it in varying levels, but I'm drawing people's awareness into those sensations, getting them to recognize the sensation of uh, physiological sympathetic elevation. So the fight or flight response, the anxiety response, right? So that then they can recognize, oh, maybe I feel my heart racing. Maybe I feel my breath getting more shallow and faster, right? Or maybe I feel myself tensing up. Now I recognize that I'm recognizing early signs. And here are some skills that I've been taught, that I've been practicing, so they're easier to access, that I can use to regulate that before I go into a full blown anxiety response, right? And so that's, in a nutshell, interoception and how I teach clients how to use interoception to regulate and pull back from that sympathetic nervous system response, fight or flight, or anxiety.